He is currently South Carolina Director for the State Freedom Caucus Network. So, as you may know, there's a Freedom Caucus here in the state. But we're not the only state with a Freedom Caucus, with a state-level Freedom Caucus. There's a network. And we learn from each other, so, well, I guess, he's currently our director in the state. Former state representative for District 20, Taylor's and Greenville East Side. Founding chairman, South Carolina Freedom Caucus, President, Majesty Music, Inc., and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. He's a recovering attorney, I like that line, and he's a guest radio host on 98.9, The Word, and everybody give a warm welcome to Adam Wayne.
Well, it is a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. On my way here from Greenville, I somehow went in and out of North Carolina 3 times. And I do not understand. I went back and looked at that map, and I do not get that whatsoever. So thank you so much. I really need that. The allergies, I've been here since, goodness, freshman year of high school, and the allergies in South Carolina still do me in. But my wife and I, we think we're homesteaders. We currently homeschool our kids. We have 3 kids under 8. 1 is 2, so they keep us just, and we think we're homesteaders, so we have this extensive garden, and we live outside, and both of us have really bad allergies, and so do my kids. So we've really made good life decisions, so I apologize if I struggle to speak. But if you have not paid any attention lately, you wouldn't be aware, but I'm assuming most of you don't fall in that category. Most of you are obviously the people that are awake in politics. You've probably been a little distressed lately at what's going on in South Carolina. I would argue the entire nation is distressed at what's going on in South Carolina, no matter what network, at least conservative-leaning network you might tune into the last month. The question on everyone's mind is, how in the world is this happening in South Carolina? And I've got friends texting me from Ohio and Florida and California and all sorts of different places going, what is going on? And I find that humorous. Yes. Because from my perspective, I'm like, well, I'm glad you guys are finally seeing the reality of South Carolina. I ran for office 8 years ago. I was a young, dumb 20-something-year-old. From Taylor's. If you know where Taylor's is, the joke is that it's the hotbed of radical conservatism in South Carolina. That's literally what they called it. If you remember Bobby Mack, you remember when he was on the radio? Yeah, that's it. He was my constituent. So that was intimidating. Knocking and Bobby Mack opens the door and says, oh, you think you're conservative? And I'm like, yes, sir, I will be. But I ran, and I grew up in a very conservative home, and I believe strongly in conservative values, and I knocked on I think it was like 4,000 doors when I first ran. We had just gotten married, then like 10 months later had our first baby, and then ran for office. Great decision, right? Yeah, isn't that a great decision? And I made a lot of promises at those doors. I was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to fight for our district, fight for our values. I'm going to fight the good old boy system. I heard that a lot from talk radio. I knew it was a thing, but I really didn't know what I was walking into. I had no clue what I was walking into. But I had made a whole lot of promises to a whole lot of people that I was going to do so. We joke in the upstate that it's because of the elevation, that in the upstate, our tax dollars just roll down to the low country. Have you heard that? That? By the way, that is a thing. It really is. And when I got down there, I knew it would be difficult to be a strong conservative in elected office. I had no clue how difficult. And by the way, I'm in, isn't this Jackie's district? Yes. Jackie's, yeah. I'm from Greenville. At least there's a number of strong conservative legislators in Greenville. Jackie does not have that. Yes, true. But if you don't know, when you're the only or one of the only strong conservatives, and everybody else detests you. I mean, everybody in Columbia agrees that the people who are terrible in elected office, the enemy is the South Carolina Freedom Caucus. You ask them, watch their faces, hear how they talk. And it's not just the left, though we probably make them lose their mind more than anyone else. They literally talk about us all the time, that we're just the most awful, we're destroying the state, we're evil, we're racist, we're I mean, anything you can think of, the Freedom Caucus is the embodiment of that to the left. That's not surprising. Like, we literally fight on every issue. That's what we organize to do. To get together, to strategize, to figure out how to message, and to choose and even encourage and embolden each other to choose to fight on every issue every day. Now that may sound hard. It's like, oh, shouldn't you choose your battles? Well, the reality is, if you fall into that line of thinking, because I heard that when I first got down there, all these Republicans would tell me, oh, no, don't make an issue of that. You got to choose your battles on every single issue. What I've discovered is choose your battles in political speak means never fight. Literally, that's what it means. And even calling out Democrats, it was like, no, don't do that. You just get them upset. I'm not kidding. I had that talking to him. And what I discovered is that in office, the entire system of reward is encouraging you to stand down, to compromise on your values and principles, to not rock the boat, to not force on-the-record votes, to not question how money's spent, and on and on and on. And you're rewarded for that. You get better committee assignments, you get treated better, you get invited to all the cool kids stuff, the really nice, great lobbyist functions, right? This is a thing. This is how the political system works. I lived it. So it's the left that hates the Freedom Caucus, it's the lobbyists. In fact, the lobbyists hates the Freedom Caucus so much that they opened their pocketbooks 2 years ago and spent over $1 million against 15, I believe it was, legislators. Now, if you don't know, that is unheard of in state politics anywhere in the country. That doesn't really happen. Why did it happen? Well, the assistant majority leader, who was a Republican, Jay West, was on record, there's a video of it, of him at a function, at a lobbyist function. He's on stage, and Jay tells everybody, the worst thing in politics are the South Carolina Freedom Caucus. They're just awful. You've got to open his quote, you've got to open your pocketbooks and help us get rid of them. This is to a room full of lobbyists. Then he hands the microphone to a Democrat, the minority leader of the Senate. And this Democrat goes, oh, that is one thing we definitely agree on. We couldn't agree more. They are the worst thing, and you guys got to help us get rid of them. Just blatant for everybody to see. By the way, story of Jay West, he helped run John Kerry's campaign back in the day in South Carolina. He ran as a Democrat for state house, lost, waited, I think, 4 years, you can fact check me, changed parties, ran as a Republican, was somehow, not by me, elected as the assistant majority leader in the House. How does that happen? By the way, a Freedom Caucus candidate ran against him, exposed his record, and beat him, and I don't think he even got 30%, or maybe got 35% for his reelection, and he lost to a Freedom Caucus candidate. Now, that story I just told you is exactly why the entire establishment detests the Freedom Caucus. Because we actually talk about how people vote. We talk about the money that goes where. We actually encourage good, strong conservatives to run for office. And that's a taboo. Why? Because nobody wants to have a challenger. Nobody wants to run. You want to run completely unopposed and not have anybody question you for how you're voting. And if somebody does, it's uncomfortable and you generally dislike them. The problem is, this is a republic. You are a part of the public trust, and you have to be held to account and answer hard questions, even if it's annoying. And you've been elected to go ask tough questions of other people and talk about how we vote and talk about how we spend money. So, wanted to run through just a few things from the history of the Freedom Caucus of major fights. One of the first things after we formed, we found out that there was a pediatric transgender clinic in South Carolina at NUSC operating with taxpayer dollars. So, and they were seeing kids from 6 years old to 14. They were bringing them in. That we were funding them to be counseled by these people to talk about gender transition and then refer them to surgeons. Now, the practice hadn't been banned yet. And so we couldn't believe this. It's like, what in the world? How is that happening in South Carolina? So I contacted leadership at the time and said, we've got to do something. We've got to, shut this down. And he's like, oh, yeah, maybe in next year's budget. And I'm like, we haven't even finished this year's budget. What are you talking about? We're going to do it. Like, huh? I just told you they're mutilating children on the taxpayer dime. He's like, oh, you got to be careful with the medical community. And I couldn't believe it. And so I opted to go straight to the media and tell everybody what was happening with our taxpayer dollars. And that's what we did. We released a public statement, sent it all across the state to every form of conservative and liberal media, got the word out. By the next day, at I believe 2 p.m., the pediatric transgender clinic was no longer in operation, had been completely shut down, and the files redacted, interestingly enough, and they were no longer using our tax dollars. We didn't have to pass a single law to do that. We just had to speak the truth about what was happening. And I was encouraged to not, if you can wrap your mind around it. Not by liberals, not by Democrats, but by Republican leadership. Another thing that happened, this is before the founding of the Freedom Caucus, we had a Justice of the Supreme Court coming up for election, Kay Hearn. She had numerous rulings where she ruled against conservatives. She was on the Supreme Court. She had voted against, if you remember the Episcopal Church fight where the liberals were wanting to take all their property because they didn't want certain lifestyles in the bishops. And she ruled against them. She had ruled against a big law enforcement case, multiple rulings. Everybody knew she was a liberal. She was up for re-election. Guess who elects the judges in South Carolina? The legislature, a Republican supermajority. So we have a known liberal, whoops, I made a mess. We have a known liberal I might need to clean that up. We have a known liberal that's in the Supreme Court. She's up for re-election. The term is a 10-year term. She can only serve for 2 years because she's aging out. So she's a liberal, and she doesn't even qualify for the full term. So we bring it up in Republican caucus. Hey, this is ludicrous. We know she's a liberal. Let's get rid of her and elect a conservative because it's our vote. And by the way, most people in the room had bellyached about some of Lindsey Graham's votes over the years. About, for liberal judges, right? So of course, the guys that bellyached about that are going to be all in for getting rid of somebody that they're voting on, right? By the way, we had just passed the heartbeat bill. And we knew that they were going to make some challenges, and they wanted to take it into court. So we made this argument. We were told, you don't do that. That is not done. You don't embarrass a judge like that. We don't remove judge. You let them retire with dignity. It's like, huh? How about we just retire them? And if they, sure, dignity, who cares? Now, retire them now. They said no. They said, you better not put that up for a recorded vote. Don't you dare make people look bad. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not going to say yes to it. So we forced a recorded vote. I believe it was like 9 people actually voted no on that judge, which was distressing, but whatever. So she got in there. She served for, I think, 1 more year. She served just long enough for the heartbeat bill to come before her, and she was the deciding vote and wrote the majority opinion that struck down the heartbeat bill and said it was unconstitutional, the pro-life legislation. And the entire Republican establishment said, oh, how could this happen? She's a terrible judge. This is awful. And it's like, you voted for that. What do you mean, how did this happen? And by the way, we have the recorded vote of how that vote went down. That was another thing that happened. Then, when what inspired the $1 million that came against the Freedom Caucus members was when we started touching the budget. Because before, when I first got there, there were maybe 3 or 4 people that would vote no on the budget. Because it was massively bloated. It pays for all sorts of ridiculous things. And you get to go by section of the budget. They put up a section and they say, here's all the law enforcement budget, yes or no. And pretty much everybody votes yes, because who's going to vote against public safety, except for maybe a few radical liberals? Then they go to the next section of the budget, the Commission of the Arts. Doesn't everybody like the arts? Don't you like the arts, right? Don't you support the arts? Don't you want to support the arts? Have you ever looked at what is in the Commission of the Arts budget? They fund drag queen shows for children. They fund drag queen shows for adults. They fund food and wine festivals. They fund gummy bear statues. They fund lewd art exhibits that are open to the public with like expressions of different like sexual positions. They fund some of the interesting things. They fund a home in the most recent budget where artists. I gotta read this because it's too good. They fund a home. I think it's called the Fresset building that we've built with our funded with our tax dollars, where a space where artists can rest. We funded that in the budget. We funded that in the budget. Yes, $55,000 of your tax dollars this year funded the Ferret House, which exists to offer a place where artists can go rest. And I'm like, why don't you just go to the library and sleep on a table? Nobody's going to bother you. Like, are we kidding right now? Like, what are we doing? $4,500 to the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. The upstate, sorry. So I guess that's only if you're in the upstate. $210,000 to just random various artists for whatever projects they're working on. Wouldn't that be nice to get that grant? Like, I mean, I don't know. My kids can do some pretty good art. Maybe I should sign up for that. $1,000 for the I Am Lavish Foundation, which is an I should have done the PowerPoint to put it up there so that you could see that it's basically a happily ever after where a grown man dressed in a very interesting fashion, not obviously in some of the pictures a man, can take people on horse riding lessons and you can live your fairy tale as, and there's no age limit. As old as you want, you can go on this and it's just great, isn't it? And on and on and on in the Arts Commission budget. That's the kind of junk that we funded in this budget. Massive amounts of climate change research. In the previous budget, one thing you funded? You funded a study on the effects of minority-owned female businesses of climate change. The effects of climate change on that. You actually funded a study for that. You funded an entire department that's express purpose is DEI. An entire department. You funded a group that exists, their entire reason for being is to find systematic instances of racism where the government is specifically being racist. And to find and expose a systemic racism, in South Carolina. That's all they do. Now, maybe you're like, well, some of that, I like gummy bear statues. Maybe you're like, I don't mind that. At the end of the day, should the state government be funding any of that? When our roads are in the condition that they are in. Really? I mean, the questions are that simple. And people like to say, oh, well, some of these, comparatively, this isn't that much money. It's millions of dollars. When the legislature just voted to increase their own pay. When the Senate has a plan to raise two of the buildings and spend maybe $3 to $8 billion over the next 8 to 10 years on building all new legislative offices that they use for 3 days for half the year. You can't make this stuff up. That is why we're in the situation we're in. And by the way, in the budget, we're also funding things like Hollywood tax subsidies to bring Hollywood companies here to try to get them to film. Do you know what that did to portions of the Atlanta suburbs? Have you seen how Atlanta's trending in the voting? Isn't it interesting? We spent $1.3 billion to coax a foreign multinational company that's one of the biggest implementers of ESGs in the world to make electric vehicles in Colombia. A declining market that every study tells us is a terrible bet. We broke the records on corporate cronyism and handouts for a company. $1.3 billion. And by the way, you know what they did? They took that, and then when they started building their headquarters, they didn't build it in South Carolina, even after we gave them that. They put them in Charlotte for the headquarters. So all that tax money, all those big jobs, that goes up there. And now they're back asking for another $200 million for cost overages on that plant. Right? Just say no. Isn't that the line for drugs? Yeah. That is a perfect line. Yeah, the spending in Colombia is like they're hooked on some kind of something. Just say no. Like spending like drunk sailors. Maybe that's a nicer way of saying that. The problems in Colombia, it's really a cultural problem. And unless you elect people who will go in and fight against that, and ask tough questions, and put things on the record, and actually vote no when it counts, it is not going to change the culture in Colombia. You know what will change? Your state. Because your state is changing. Some states, like Florida, they're changing too. They're getting more conservative. South Carolina is at risk. Some areas are getting more conservative, but a lot of people argue that South Carolina is actually trending purple, like North Carolina. And why is Florida doing so well? Yes, Mr. DeSantis. Because the Republicans there actually act like Republicans. They believe in the things they put on their campaign flyers that they send out. And they actually implement and use, and that's one thing that I always laugh about with the Freedom Caucus. People that are detractors, and there's two from right here in this delegation that have their little podcasts, and they talk about the Freedom Caucus all the time. And I occasionally see clips of that, and I just laugh, because it's like all of the arguments against the Freedom Caucus is they're annoyed that the Freedom Caucus simply wants you to do everything that Florida has already done. Have you ever noticed that? Almost every single issue, I would actually challenge you to find an issue that doesn't fall into the category I just said. Something that Florida's already done, already led on, that would make the state better, that we just can't do in South Carolina. Why? And a perfect example of what's happened is what's happened the last week or so. One is the Dr. Traxler appointment. If you didn't know, the person who oversaw vaccine campaigns in South Carolina, she pushed for mandates, lockdowns. She was one of the main drivers for keeping kids at home and the learning loss that happened there, for masking kids at schools, even though all the science said that that was inaccurate. She is now appointed as the acting director of public health in South Carolina. Now, when that appointment came out, I was talking to some people, and I was like, we gotta blast this appointment. We gotta blast the governor. This is one of the few things that he actually does in this state, because we have a constitutionally weak governor. Appointments is one of the key things. He just botched an appointment and put somebody that we know the track record was abuse of power during COVID. And I had some more establishment people who were like, oh, well, I don't know if she's really that bad. And so I said, well, you know what, we're going to look. So me and my friend Jordan, who is the current chairman of the Freedom Caucus, we spent maybe an hour, ladies and gentlemen, maybe an hour digging into this person. Just two of us. While juggling, by the way, 3 children because my wife was at a work thing. That's all we did. And you know what we found about this lovely new public health director in that time? By the way, you can go check the facts of what I'm saying. Jordan and I were the first 2 people that called out anything about Traxler, said she needed to go, and told people why. This days before anybody else said anything. We discovered that she was a regular attendee at Jim Clyburn and Joe Biden events during the 2020 election. That she actually donated to Joe Biden. That at one of the events, she posted publicly that it was time to impeach Trump in 2020. That she put her own infant in the COVID trials for the vaccine because she said she just believes that all vaccines are safe so much. Whatever. It's her, their prerogative. But really, is that the kind of person that is the ideal person to have sweeping administrative and regulatory and emergency power authority in South Carolina to shut places down, issue mandates, to quarantine you, and control local law enforcement to enforce those? Did you know that that's the powers of the new acting public health director in South Carolina? That's what we found. Anyone in the governor's office could have found that in 10 minutes. But they didn't even vet one of the most powerful appointments they have. But really, is that a rhetorical question? She said, what does that say about McMaster and his team? Exactly. It says that we have somebody in office who I would argue governs as a Democrat. That is a Democrat appointment. Am I wrong? I'm dead serious. People get mad at this and say I'm a troublemaker, and I'm literally saying you appointed a known Democrat donor who called for the president's impeachment and who abused their power in the past. That is a radical liberal Democrat appointment. That, period. Those are the facts. And if that offends you because you like McMaster, well, I'm sorry you're offended. I'm just spitting facts. Like, that's the reality. And by the way, on every major issue that you will find where there is a fight between the Republican caucus and the Freedom Caucus, this is exactly how it goes. The Freedom Caucus pulls out some information that's pretty much shocking to the public, says, this person's got to go. They say, no, we don't need to do that. That's not how things are done here. And maybe they're buddy with somebody or there's some lobbyist, whatever. And they say, okay, well, we're going to put a vote on it, either the bill or the appointment or whatever. No, don't do that. And then they put it to a vote, and either some of them actually vote against it and lose re-election, or everybody comes around and votes together, and we all act like it was the Republicans all together that did it. When every single time on every single issue, it's actually the vocal Freedom Caucus who started, inform people. And that's one thing too. You'll hear people constantly say, "Well, listen, I want to get along with people, and I don't want to be loud, and I don't want to cause, be doing things for social media or for speeches. Like, I just want to be down there and do my votes and represent." Here's the problem with that. If you're in religious circles, how do you grow in religious circles? You evangelize and you proselytize. Any business people in here, how do you sell a product or service? You market. You actually work. You message. You talk about what you believe in and what you're selling, or else it doesn't get sold and it doesn't have any impact. When you elect somebody to elected office, you are electing them to use that office and the mouthpiece that they have to advance the conservative cause and defend your fundamental liberties. And if they do not do that because they're worried about leadership getting mad at them or the media getting mad at them or some liberals getting mad at them, replace them with somebody that will, because it is one of the bare minimum things they should be doing. Now, if you have a guy that isn't even voting right, well, that's on you. That's public record. If you have somebody that's voting against your interests, you've got to do everything you can to get them out of office. But I'm even saying we got to expect more from conservatives. And like I said, we have examples. Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, they're not shy about what they believe and what they're going to do. They're pretty bold. They don't really care if it, ruffles some feathers. And that's how you actually get things done. So what happened with redistricting? Because I'm already pretty much over time. Same thing happened there. We found out the Supreme Court ruled in the Calais decision that majority-minority districts that are drawn on the basis of race, are unconstitutional. There was a district drawn in Louisiana where they had done this. They drew lines in order to create a district that would be controlled and have with the stated goal of having somebody that would be a minority to represent that. The Supreme Court looked at that and said that's blatantly unconstitutional. Even though these districts are all across the South, they've been around since the 90s, and you shouldn't have those. This happened in April. Immediately when that happened, all of the Freedom Caucus members and the conservatives said, redistrict now. We have one of those. Jim Clyburn's district in the 6th is look at the map. It's a blatantly gerrymandered district. It was created in the 90s when the Clinton administration strong-armed Republican states in the South to draw these districts. They did. That's where his district was created. He's been in it since then. The 90s. And by the way, he's one of the most radical liberal. He's the chief whip of the Democrats. He's Pelosi's errand boy. He is the one who picked Joe Biden and Barack Obama because South Carolina's first primary in the country, right, in the South. And that was who he picked. So he's the reason we have those guys. We finally have a chance to get rid of him. We call for it. By the way, I'm in Ralph Norman territory. Ralph Norman called for it in August of the previous year, if you missed that. And guess what? Every single member of Republican leadership in the legislature said, no, we're not going to redraw our maps. It would be nice to put it up. Post-Courier ran the story. The Speaker of the House said, nope, that's fine, we're not going to do it. Shane Massey, the Majority Leader of the Senate, said, nope, our map's fine, we're not going to do it. Majority Leader of the House, Davey Hyatt, nope, map's just fine, we're not going to do it. The Governor, not interested. We've already dealt with our map, we're good to go. Alabama, Louisiana, all these other states, start moving the process, they say no. Well, we didn't stop hounding them. We were incessant. We wouldn't stop talking about it. And then something magical happened. The White House got involved and said, hey, actually, this is a majority-minority district. The Democrats have gerrymandered to the nines in every... Do you know New England? They have gerrymandered every single district of 6 states, 23 different congressional districts, not a single Republican. Yet 40% of the population votes Republican. Isn't that odd? Why? Because they partisanly gerrymandered to do that, which actually is constitutional. In South Carolina and all across the South, if you look at the map, there's all these blue districts. Why? Because they forced the race-based districts. So, Trump weighs in, and suddenly, some people start flipping. But remember, they all opposed it when we had the opportunity. Shane Massey, the majority leader of the Senate, goes and starts arguing, actually, the map is totally constitutional. It's already been ruled on to the Supreme Court, because if you missed it, and this is where you're going to fall asleep, but those that are interested, all 5 of you, follow me for a second. There was a case called the Alexander decision. It was a couple years back. It was all about Nancy Mace's congressional district, XC1, the most contentious, close district in South Carolina, like for blue and red. And in that race, when they redistricted, they hardly tweaked the 6th district, the racially gerrymandered one, at all. But they cut a few neighborhoods out of the 1st and put it in the 6th in order to help get a higher partisan majority in the 1st for Republicans. Well, the Democrats said, that's wrong, you're diluting the minority vote of those districts, and the Constitution, as we have has been very clear, you can't harm racial minority representation. So they sued, took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that actually the drawing of the 1st district and those specific lines that they did was partisan reasons, not only on the basis of race or predominantly. So therefore, that part of drawing the map was constitutional. The Calais decision had nothing to do with that. The Calais decision said all of that body of law that we've had that has said you can't harm racial minorities, that is still fully valid. But going forward, it is unconstitutional to draw on the basis of race to help minorities, because either way it's racist. You're harming this priority and giving this priority over the other. That's what the ruling in Calais was. And guess what? I told you, in the 90s, they drew that district. It still looks very similar. It was never fixed. It is still a racially gerrymandered district, and it hasn't been challenged. I will be shocked, actually, if we get sued and it goes to a challenge. And by the way, that's what's so infuriating me in this whole issue. For 40 years, and most of you have lived this, the left has weaponized the ability to use government to impose racist policies to advance one race over the other or punish. That's what affirmative action is. That's what DEI hiring is. This gender or this race or this gender fluid, whatever, we need this number and not that because of immutable characteristics that you can't control. And that's wrong. And you finally have the chance from the Supreme Court to right all of that. I mean, that ideology has radicalized generations of our youth and of our minority communities. Radicalized them, teaching them that it's a moral good. Are you telling me it's time?
I take a question.
Okay. And you have this chance to fix it. And what happens in South Carolina? They say no. And even though we started getting people to flip, not enough. They drug their feet. And by the way, the Freedom Caucus filed the bill to get this started in January because we knew the Calais decision was coming. Most people were saying, under the makeup of the Supreme Court, it's likely going to strike down this because it's blatantly racist and unconstitutional. Jordan Pace forced them to have a hearing, talked about it. They had people testify. And the leadership of that committee, Weston Newton and Jay Jordan, they killed that bill in committee, said, no, we don't need to deal with that. Back then in February when they gave it a hearing. And then in April, they were all shocked. Oh, we didn't have time to do this. There's not enough time to get it done. Well, if you had just listened to conservatives, which is the tale as old as time, for the entire way that South Carolina politics works, we would have gotten it done. But now I'm glad it happened. I'm not glad it died. I think I'm very sad that it died. But I'm glad that it happened and everybody got to see who's who. Got to see leadership go on record and say, no, we're not going to do this. And the senators who actually did kill it. And by the way, worked with the ACLU and these other groups to get everyone to go out and vote early so that they could argue, oh, early voting started and we didn't stop debate in time, which is what they voted to not stop debate in time, and let it happen where the vote would happen on the first day of early voting, the final vote. Did you know that? So that then they can say, oh, record early vote totals. 40, 80,000, whatever the numbers have voted, we just can't do it anymore. It's like, well, you could have done it months ago. You could have done it when the decision came out. You could have done it the day before, but you chose not to. And now, the Trump administration, who's already saying they're going to go after the people that have opposed it, there were 4 Republicans in the House that voted against redistricting. I believe one of them is from your district. Fact check me on that, from this area. And then there were, what was the final? Really, there's 7 to 8 senators who were vehemently opposed and killed this. There's different combinations of the final vote. Some people say 12, but I would argue that there were 6 to 7 that specifically did everything they could to kill this. Most of them, unfortunately, from the Low Country. But don't worry, we'll get rid of them. I think it's given us the opportunity. So I need to end, but I'm just going to end with, we have a battle raging right now in South Carolina for the soul of the Republican Party. Do you want more of the same? Do you want to continually funding things that are antithetical to your values? Funding things that are literally turning our state blue? What is the obsession with jobs? We gotta get jobs here. You're the government. You don't create jobs. Like, stop it. We don't need overdevelopment. We have a wonderful community here and culture, and everybody wants to come here. So stop throwing our tax dollars at corporations and begging liberal corporations to come here, and instead of fixing our infrastructure and our schools and giving people money for them to educate their kids how they want to. That's what we need to be doing. And we need more people in office who are willing to say that, force the votes to do that, and actually vote the right way in getting it done. So, I will be finished now and I will take questions. But thank you all for having me.